He spoke to you from these steps and said that this government was not going to hang around and that we would not wait until Brexit Day, October the 31st, to deliver on the priorities of the British people. And so I'm proud to say that on Wednesday, Chancellor Sajid Javid is going to set out the most ambitious spending round for more than a decade. I said I wanted to make your streets safer, and that is why we are recruiting another 20,000 police officers. I said I wanted to improve your hospital and reduce waiting times at your GP. And so we are doing 20 new hospital upgrades in addition to the 34 billion more going into the NHS. And I said I wanted every child in this country to have a superb education. That's why I announced last week that we are levelling up funding across the country and spending much more next year in both primary and secondary schools. And it's to push forward this agenda on these and many other fronts that we need a Queen's speech in October, while leaving due time to debate Brexit and other matters. And as we come to that Brexit deadline, I am encouraged by the progress we are making. In the last few weeks, the chances of a deal have been rising, I believe, for three reasons. They can see that we want a deal. They can see that we have a clear vision for our future relationship with the EU, something that has not always perhaps been the case. And they can see that we are utterly determined to strengthen our position by getting ready to come out, regardless, come what may. But if there's one thing that can hold us back in these talks, it is the sense in Brussels that MPs may find some way to cancel the referendum, or that tomorrow MPs will vote with Jeremy Corbyn for yet another pointless delay. I don't think they will. I hope that they won't. But if they do, they will plainly chop the legs out from under the UK position and make any further negotiation absolutely impossible. And so I say, to show our friends in Brussels that we are united in our purpose, MPs should vote with the government against Corbyn's pointless delay. I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts. We will not accept any attempt to go back on our promises or scrub that referendum. And armed and fortified with that conviction, I believe we will get a deal at that crucial summit in October, a deal that Parliament will certainly be able to scrutinise. And in the meantime, let's let our negotiators get on with their work without that sword of Damocles over their necks and without an election. Without an election. I don't want an election. You don't want an election. Let's get on with the people's agenda. Fighting crime, improving the NHS, boosting schools, cutting the cost of living, unlocking talent and opportunity across the entire United Kingdom with infrastructure, education and technology. It is a massive agenda. Let's come together and get it done, and let's get Brexit done by October the 31st. Thank you very much.
To Scotland at 7, I'm Gordon Ross, and in the studio this evening with me to look at the events of today, particularly with regards to Brexit and the Prime Minister's speech, which you just heard at the top of the show, is my special guest Leslie Orr, who's an historian and an activist and one of the leaders of Women for Indy. So welcome to the show, Leslie, and thank you for being our guest this evening.
We don't have leaders in Women for Indy, but I am on the committee.
One of the leaders. I'm sorry, I take it back. So this evening, obviously, the big topic tonight is Boris Johnson and Brexit. And everything is all happening in the next 2 days. I mean, I've got a list here which has got so much highlighter on it, I can hardly read it. But basically, today, everybody is getting back to work in Westminster. Yeah. And officially, as far as I understand it, they actually start work. Where is it? They start work at 1:30, I beg your pardon. Tomorrow they officially start work. And while Boris was talking there, a Scottish court is at the moment questioning the legality of Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament. Mm-hmm. Now, I've never heard in my lifetime of any sitting Prime Minister being challenged by a court for the legality of doing something on behalf of the country. I don't think this has ever happened before. Have you ever heard of anything like this before in your lifetime?
No, I haven't. I think it's a pretty good indication of the final collapse of the unwritten British Constitution and the system of government. That actually, I was being reminded today that King Charles I made a thing of proroguing Parliament, suspending Parliament, and that wasn't looked on very kindly by...
The word prorogue always puzzled me, and when I was thinking about it today, the words when you put pro and rogue together basically means I'm for rogues. I think probably sums the situation up pretty well.
But I mean, it is a serious matter. I mean, as you say, it's not just in the Scottish court, the Court of Session.
To suspend
in
Parliament, I mean, the suspension is for 23 days. I mean, proroguing Parliament used to be done for maybe 5 or 6 days.
Yeah, I
prior
mean, it's
to
a kind of
speech, and it was to prepare the scripting, if you like, for the Queen's speech. But either the Queen's going to have an incredibly long speech, or this is just a ploy to reduce the amount of time that his opponents have to level their guns in his direction.
Well, what do you think is the answer
my guess
to that?
is that he's basically trying to reduce the amount of time.
I mean, I think this is classic Boris Johnson, really, manipulating and disrupting, utilising, playing with this unwritten constitution that we've got with a very kind of single-minded intention, which, as you say, is to avoid at all costs any kind of meaningful scrutiny for his plans and intentions as far as Brexit is concerned, and his declared, as he was saying there, he's absolutely determined that we're going to come out on the 31st of October at all costs. So, I mean, this is really, it is a big deal because it's undercutting the whole basis on which the Westminster parliamentary system and that sovereignty of Parliament that we've kind of assumed or supposedly assumed over centuries. It's all based on
gentlemen's agreements, and nothing is written. Everything is done by convention and by prior precedent.
Yeah, and some people seem to think that has worked very well for centuries. It's created this kind of stable form of government, and so we have a constitutional monarchy, but in fact, the monarch is never going to challenge.
Although in theory she can.
In theory she can, but would she do that? And without that kind of meaningful head of state intervention, this gives enormous amount of power to the Prime Minister.
I remember during the 2014 referendum on independence that it was said that the Queen, under no circumstances, was allowed to take any kind of political side in this. However, I would have thought that this particular instance, this is not political, this is a national crisis, and it's a crisis for the entire British Isles, the whole of the United Kingdom. You would have thought that perhaps the Queen might have had something to say about this, and might have been able to say, well, hang on a minute, no, I'm not going to give my assent to this because I think you're being really stupid. And go back and talk about it in Parliament and come back with something a bit more sensible. And yet she hasn't.
Well, that's on the. You're presuming then that the Queen, this monarch that we have, is ever going to do anything. I mean, she is, apart from the nature of that role and the way in which it's evolved in modern nation-state Britain. I think she herself is intensely conservative and cautious, and it would take an enormous amount of courage, perhaps, for her to go against all the tradition and precedent of her own time as head of state, and stretching
she's
back.
absolutely steeped in all of that.
Yeah.
Historical
I mean,
convention.
it's a great demonstration of the fundamental flaws of a so-called
pointlessness.
constitutional monarchy. That we're stuck now with an extremely expensive feudal system that is of no political value, or as you're saying, no constitutional value, because you cannot do anything.
You wouldn't really mind having a queen so much if she was actually capable of saving the nation from a disaster like this. But in this case, she seems completely powerless to do anything about it.
I probably would still mind about having a queen, but yes, I take your point. What's needed here? I mean, if there's going to be a system of checks and balances, which is supposed to be the way democracy works, one of the values of having a separation of head of state and executive minister is that the head of state does, on these exceptional occasions, have some
practice as a gatekeeper,
absolutely, or can put a stop on the excesses.
The Lords are supposed to have a similar role, are they not? To provide wiser counsel for the Commons in the event of something as large as this. As far as I remember, the Lords are by and large very pro-European.
They are. I mean, in this particular situation, they have been a voice, or they have provided alternative perspectives and have challenged and paused the process or sent it back to the House of Commons. So again, you could say, well, in theory or in principle, having the second chamber, this is where it's a valuable thing. The problem with our second chamber is who's in it, really.
Yes,
I mean, at the moment they may do useful things or say useful things in relation to this particular set of circumstances, but really, I mean, the whole edifice of Westminster government and Parliament and all the conventions and unwritten ways in which it operates it is absolutely the dying days of the British Empire,
it
and the
feels like somebody has
constitution that goes
just
with
started
that.
to unravel the jumper, and it's starting to go a row at a time.
I mean, some people are talking, saying we've got to save democracy, but I think what this demonstrates is the fundamental flaws of this particular...
It's not a real democracy that we have.
Yeah.
No, it's
it's not something to save. It's something, we'll have to see what emerges in this time of crisis. But the longer term, or even the quite short term goal or aspiration for us must be, to bring something new and democratic out of the ashes of this system.
I was going to say, if I was to take a much more neutral stance on this and have a look at the British democratic system, the fact that it doesn't have a written constitution makes it a very flexible and agile system. It could easily react to this if there was a way in which Boris Johnson can be stopped. But it seems that he's actually headed them off at the pass by moving the goalposts yet again, by deliberately pushing the envelope of time for a proroguing of Parliament much further than anyone has ever done before. And again, this is the elasticity of the system that they have.
Yeah, I mean, you may have a point that the flexibility of the system might arguably have been valuable in times gone by in certain circumstances, depending on your point of view. But I think we're really out of kilter with most modern democracies, which have a written constitution, and I think this is why the whole notion of creating or establishing a process whereby we can create a written constitution. I mean, in Scotland, that's part of the debate that we're having about what a future Scotland would look like, and on what principles and guidelines would it be established.
But it seems also that the Prime Minister now is threatening his own party members and saying that if they don't back him in whatever this week holds, in other words, the assault, if you like, by the anti-no deal coalition, the sort of rebel alliance, as they're calling it. It's beginning to sound like Star Wars. But he is telling them that his own MPs, that if they don't vote for him in this, they don't back him up, then in a general election they're going to be deselected and out on the rear. I mean, that's pretty much as bad as you can be to your own MPs by withdrawing the whip.
Indeed it is, and I think this, we've reached the end game of what's been going on for a long time, and what has totally dominated our politics at the UK Westminster level, and that is this fundamental fissure that's running right down the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
And that's what led us into the referendum, the European referendum, and all that we're seeing now is, we've got the far right, cabal have now seized control, and they're going to absolutely use the control that they've got to stamp
the
their
sinister figure of Dominic Cummings scuttling in and out of the door of number 10 in a T-shirt with a cigarette burn in it was a rather strange sight this week. I'd like to sort of move the Brexit subject on a little further and talk about the SNP's Westminster group and their reaction to this. And of course, Ian Blackford, who is pretty combative most of the time, has come out swinging as well here. And he's saying that the Westminster, he's saying that it was untenable for politicians in Westminster to block the people of Scotland from having a say over their own future. As support for Scottish independence has grown. And we now know from the poll done by Lord Ashcroft a couple of weeks ago, and that will be a very conservative, with a large C, poll, that we are at the moment 52% in favour of independence. So Blackford's basically saying what everybody is saying, that we are. One minute we're told that Scotland is somehow a partner in an equal union of equals, I beg your pardon, and the next minute we're told to shut up and do what we're told. They can't have it both ways.
No,
surely.
they can't have it. Well, Theresa May tried to have it both ways. I'm not so sure that Johnson is particularly, I haven't heard much coming from him about our precious union.
Maybe he just doesn't care.
He doesn't
anymore.
care. He's riding roughshod over, and he doesn't care. It's a power game as far as he's concerned. He thinks he's got. Of course,
he's annoyed
he's
the business
holding all the
community
reins.
many times.
He's a yes, So yeah, I mean. We're hearing nothing new from Ian Blackford, but the situation is perhaps a different one now that
there is a little
there
bit
is
of
evidence.
There's a little bit of detail that Ian has given us here, and he's talking about saving Scotland. I mean, he's been very blunt about it, saving Scotland, and in particular, he mentioned our universities, our food and drink sector, agriculture, farming industries, and our tourism industry. All under serious threat.
They are under serious threat, yeah.
And Scottish Tory MPs as well are basically nowhere to be found. They seem to...
Yeah, but that's no surprise.
And they're not in the Rebel Alliance.
None of them are in the Rebel Alliance,
as somebody said, there's not a spine between them. They have scuttled off...
they're just hiding under all their usual little rocks.
Onto the winning side, as they say.
Yeah.
And we haven't heard a peep out of David Mundell since his sacking. I believe he's just basically hiding under the back benches at the moment and hoping it'll all go away. Anyway, according to Ian Blackford, he's urging members across the House to put their political differences aside to work together and oppose Boris Johnson's no-deal plans. He said there's a clear majority in Parliament at the moment, that's pretty important to mention, to stop no-deal Brexit, and it's time that the politicians put their constituents before their own political ambitions. Now, I was speaking of that, I don't know if you saw this evening, David Gauke, senior Tory cabinet minister, has said that he's prepared to put his own job on the line for his constituents. I wonder how many other Tory MPs might do the same.
Yeah, well, I suppose it depends at which stage in their careers they have
Indeed.
reached. You know, if they're likely to kind of to come to the end of their working lives at the next election anyway, you know, they've got less to lose looking at it from their perspective. You know, some of the old big beasts, I don't know about Ken Clarke or Philip Hammond or, some of these guys. But yeah, I mean, I guess, again, what these individual MPs, Conservative MPs, are confronted with is precisely, what do they think they're doing? What do they belong to Parliament? Do they have a responsibility to their constituents? What's the nature of that responsibility? Or are they simply Conservative Party fodder for the lobbies, for voting the right way?
We have some quotations here, or some quotes from The Guardian today, which say that an expected Commons vote this week to block no-deal Brexit could be very tight, according to David Gauke, who is an ex-minister, minister turned backbench rebel now. But he's also said that at the start of what could be a tumultuous and fractious week for Parliament and politics, and more widely, he said the threats seemed to show Boris Johnson was intent on forcing a general election. Gauke said he had written to the Attorney General Geoffrey Cox and his successor as Justice Secretary Robert Buckland, asking for clarification after Michael Gove repeatedly refused to rule out the possibility of government ignoring a backbench law passed to stop the deal. So it looks as if even Gauke himself is looking at the legalities of what Gove was saying about ignoring a law.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't suit them.
I mean, this is really concerning, isn't it? When a member of the government is threatening to ignore the law of the land, and these kind of autocratic dictatorial tendencies that we've seen coming down the line at us. Now is the time when we're seeing those being enacted, and it is extremely concerning and sinister. And it's I suppose there's a debate to be had, but it seems like certainly a step change away from. Even when politicians have huge differences of opinion and are confronting one another across the House, up till this point, we might say they have remained constrained by the unwritten constitution, which is
in other words, they know the boundaries of convention.
Yes, but these guys seem quite happy just to kind of ride roughshod over that, and have a kind of end game that I don't know. It's hard not to see parallels with what's going on in the United States, or there are so many of these extremely right wing leaders who have got into power. Do you see Boris Johnson
as the same kind of disruptor that Donald Trump has become in the United States? Maybe it's a different character, I know, but does he perform the same function?
I think he is a disruptor, and I think he wants to
break something,
to break things up, and to open up vacuums that then he can
he and his friends can then move into.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of vacuums, Tony Blair has warned UK Labour not to fall into what he calls an election elephant trap. I'm presuming he means Jeremy Corbyn when he says the elephant in the room, the elephant trap. So this is a report from Reuters that the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is laying an election elephant trap for the opposition Labour Party that it should avoid. The former minister, Tony Blair, has warned. Now he goes on to say that, let's just find out the rest of this. Okay, Boris Johnson knows that if no deal stands on its own as a proposition, it might well fail, but if he mixes it up with the Corbyn question in a general election and makes it either Brexit or Jeremy Corbyn, that many people will vote for Brexit rather than risk a Corbyn government. So he's actually rolling the dice here, I think, in political palace to see if he can gain a new majority instead of the majority of one he's depending on with the DUP.
Yeah, well, the figures are looking quite good. The polling figures are looking quite good for Johnson and his
What are
government.
the polling figures looking like? Can you remember?
I can't remember off the top
How
of my
far ahead
head,
they are of
but it's
Labour?
about 8 points ahead. I think. I could be wrong, but I think that's what what I've seen recently. I mean,
We'll try and
elephant
find
trap.
out.
What? Okay, Tony Blair is. There's another bit of a disruptor.
He likes to wade in.
He
like
really
Gordon
likes
Brown.
to. He really likes to wade in when he should have
Pontificate.
disappeared over the horizon a long time ago. But
He certainly doesn't like Jeremy Corbyn.
he
does
doesn't.
I
He
don't
doesn't like Jeremy Corbyn. I can't say Jeremy Corbyn is my favourite leader. I don't think he's a good leader.
No,
But
it's probably a worthy backbencher, but not a great leader.
he doesn't have some of the leadership qualities that really the Labour Party are requiring in order to achieve.
I noticed that the media is referring to the Rebel Alliance, as I've been calling it now, as opposition lawmakers. Now this sounds like a little bit of framing to an American way of describing politicians who are trying to legislate to prevent something from happening as lawmakers. It's an interesting way of framing it, because it sounds like the Prime Minister's the lawbreaker, they're the lawmakers. Anyway, it says here that Johnson is threatening to expel rebel Conservative lawmakers if they thwart the Brexit plans by voting with the opposition. Right, so we know this. It's important for the government to establish the confidence of the House of Commons, and that's essentially a confidence matter. Who should control the legislative agenda, Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson, according to Jacob Rees-Mogg? So they are framing this,
Of course,
in
they're
terms
framing
of
it.
a Corbyn government
Yeah.
versus a no-deal Brexit.
Yes, and Corbyn has been a bogey figure ever since he became the leader of the Labour Party. Not just, as we've heard, not just for Conservative politicians, but also for many Labour and old New Labour guys. So what's the answer? I mean, what's Tony Blair? What's his answer to this kind of this elephant trap? What is Jeremy Corbyn? What are the Labour Party meant to do? They've been calling for a general election for a long time. The responsibility then, the task then, is during a general election campaign to confront and overcome that setting up of Brexit versus Corbyn as the worst possible evil.
Okay,
I'm not impressed with Tony Blair's
I can
intervention.
see from your body language that you're not impressed at all by that. Okay, well, let's change the subject for a while to something completely non-Brexity.
Non-Brexity, very good. That's
but a little bit Brexity. It's not as bad as Brexit. Let's put it that way. The SNP have released a statement today where they're telling the Tories to think again on vital family reunification rules. Now, obviously, families in the United Kingdom who are basically consisting of people who have come from Europe and have set up home and had families here and have maybe 2 or 3 generations sometimes are about to be disrupted or even split up by these new hostile environment that the Tory party has set up. Now, the SNP's immigration spokesman, Stuart MacDonald, has said here, it's imperative that the Home Office urgently puts in place procedures that will allow vital family reunification to continue. Mm-hmm. So if people are here already, that they're able to bring the rest of their family with them if they have come for work.
Yeah.
And this is something which doesn't seem to be taken into account at all in the new immigration regulations that the Tories have rushed into position.
Really, the Tories' behaviour in the Home Office is, their whole response and their whole ethos, if we can call it that, with regard to immigration and to families, has been appalling and shameful for many years. And this is a particularly pernicious example of the hostile environment. One of the I was just reading earlier today, Alf Dubs, who got the House of Commons to pass legislation that would enable children, unaccompanied children, to come into this country.
Indeed, yes.
And the numbers that have been reduced to a tiny number, and that's really shameful. But one of the impacts of this proposal is, of course, that for example, unaccompanied minors whose parents have been killed or died in circumstances of war, conflict, whatever, trying to make their way to Britain because they've got uncles or aunts or extended family here. They will not be, under this new proposal, they will not be allowed to come into this country. That is absolutely despicable.
It flies in the face of the normal United Nations accepted sort of behaviour of national governments when refugees arrive on their shores who plainly traumatised, especially children.
Yeah.
And this harks back to this famous comment about, which Boris Johnson made about burqas.
Yeah.
If you remember, he said that women in burqas look like letterboxes. And he made all sorts of disparaging comments, which he dressed up as humour, but which have an underlying racist element to them, which everybody could see, I think. And this seems to be coming through in everything that they do at the moment. The idea, as you say, that children, unaccompanied children whose parents have maybe drowned trying to cross the channel, would be turned away, even if they have family here who could look after them. And take care of them. I
mean, this is putting children in real harm's way, of trafficking, of sexual abuse, children
exploitation
alone.
Of all kinds.
All sorts of exploitation. So this is, it's absolutely pandering to the worst excesses of that mentality, which creates us and them.
Yes.
And others, and less deserving or more deserving. As you say, this is totally against the spirit and letter of human rights legislation.
And it's having a demonstrable effect also on the number of racist attacks in the United Kingdom. A monitoring group has said that abuse incidents jumped, and this is astonishing, by 375% in the week following the Prime Minister's article where he made these comments about women wearing burqas.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about underlying racism. I would have said it's pretty blatant racism, that comment that he made. And it's very evident, there's plenty of research evidence that these kinds of statements in the public domain by people of political power and persuasion. I mean, he did that when he was writing in the Telegraph, but it informs and it legitimises and it makes acceptable the kinds of behaviour that is evidently has resulted from his statements. So this is just yet another way in which there is something utterly toxic and sinister about the whole direction of travel that Johnson has displayed in this thoroughly opportunistic way, his kind of power-seeking, pandering to the worst of the kind of racist, exclusive mentality, the little Englander mentality.
My own impression is that he's learning from Donald Trump how to do this. If you can take the wealthy with him because he is already pandering to their wishes by taking us out of the European Union and away from the antitrust laws that the European Union is about to enact, which would prevent them from hiding their wealth. But he needs to be able to take, shall we say, the ordinary people with them as well. And he's doing that by legitimising racism, it seems.
He is. I mean, he is contributing to a much broader and deeply unpleasant and dangerous discourse, public discourse, that has been fed in recent years, and which has stimulated this kind of the kind of growth of very overt racism, which kind of harks back to the Enoch Powell type of statement. And I'm sure you're right that he's learning from Trump, and it's not just kind of picking it up along the way, ad hoc kind of learning. I think they've had plenty of opportunity. These two are working together in order to pursue their own particular agendas in the United States and in Britain and
from the
widely.
point of view of women as well, whom I know you represent in Women for Indy, these statistics concerning the number of racist attacks in the United Kingdom say that the majority of victims were female. Almost 60% of them were female, obviously seen as an easy target for these yobs, these guys who wander the streets, spitting and abusing people. And would they do that, to their own women folk? I doubt it very much.
Well, I wouldn't be too sure about that, because I absolutely think that the whole package that is represented and that is being purveyed by Trump and Johnson and others is deeply misogynist. We were talking before we started this evening about Greta Thunberg and how she has been coming under the most horrendous attacks from pathetically powerful white men. But I think this is all that these things are not unrelated by any means. Patriarchy, which is really very deeply ingrained in these male leaders and their way of engaging and their aspirations, the kind of world that they think they feel entitled to create and to live in, worlds of entitlement and privilege. Really fundamental to that, I think, as well as racism, is misogyny and a deep sexism, which isn't just expressed at this kind of rhetorical level, but structurally as well and culturally. So you're right in the sense that the burqa comment
picked on that particularly, didn't he?
is particularly focused on women from the Muslim tradition, but there are all sorts of ways in which, as we know only too well, men like Trump and Johnson sway around through the days with this, pretty vile kind of masculine entitlement
to say whatever they feel like, and
to act the way they wish with in relation to women as well as to others. So
I'm sorry to cut across you, but there is another subject here which I think really also goes to the heart of what we've been talking about with women, and this is a report by Police Scotland, and it's a new campaign which is to do with rape and also how it's reported. Now, according to the launch of this, this is known as #GetConsent. Sex without consent is rape. Now, this is the police trying to get over, particularly to young people, I guess, but particularly young men.
Yes.
That unless they get the consent of the sexual partner, then what they're doing is non-consensual and therefore constitutes rape under the law. Now there are some statistics and some slides to show, and this is I think we can see the poster that Police Scotland have designed. There it is. Okay, text, flirt, meet, sex without consent is rape. So they're trying to get over to people that even a first and second date does not mean consent. Dozens of people have reported being raped on a first or a second date, according to new figures released by Police Scotland. It's launching its Get Consent campaign. Police Scotland is warning that sex without consent is rape, whether or not it is with any kind of force, I guess. More than 160 people have reported being raped in the very early stages of dating in 2018. Now, 160 people in that year reported that in the very early stages of dating one person, that they were raped, they were forced into sexual activity against their will. Mm-hmm. That's astonishing, is it not?
Well, you may be sadly, I'm not astonished. I'm deeply depressed
and disappointed as well that men would behave
but it's not astonishing, because my guess is, and I think Rape Crisis Scotland would certainly support this, is that 160 of reported rapes under those circumstances is really the tip of an iceberg, because the vast majority of rapes and sexual assaults go unreported. And I'm glad that the police are tackling this issue in the way that they're doing, because, as you say, this hashtag Get Consent is directed to men, and for far too long and for far too often, issues around sexual violence and sexual assault and how we address those and what we're meant to do to avoid this, they have been targeted at women.
Not the men.
Not the men. And this is a fundamental problem of men's behaviour and attitudes and expectations. I was talking about, Trump and Johnson and company having this kind of default masculine sense of privilege and entitlement. Yeah. And sadly, I think this is very widespread among young men.
I think young men actually idolise these sorts of characters and actually take them as role models.
Well, some do, but even if I think what's underlying this is, in the 1960s and 70s, there was that sort of sense of women's sexual liberation. Breaking away from centuries of women being constrained and submissive, and that sex wasn't something that you either talked about or did, and you were stigmatized if you. So all of that was a hugely problematic, a real part of the kind of patriarchal norms of the society that we had. And then what happened was this notion of, sexual autonomy and sexual freedom. Sadly, the way in which that kind of transformed set of ways for women for thinking about themselves as entitled to sexual pleasure and sexual choice.
They had the right to enjoy it
as
much as the men.
But what has happened, of course, is that patriarchal society has incorporated and reframed that, so that now what the norm is for men and boys to expect sexual availability. And women once more are being treated as sexual objects, as commodities, as there for men's pleasure. And that's, so there's a very fundamental issue here, that people using apps or, meeting up for dates, first or second dates, there's that kind of assumption, okay, we're going out, we're having a drink, maybe have a meal or whatever. So at the end of the day, I'm entitled to sex.
I've paid for the meal, therefore.
This is really.
But then it becomes transactional. There's not even anything romantic about that in the slightest. To me as a man, I would say that is turning your date into a transaction. I bought the meal, therefore you provide me with sex.
But even if it's not at that kind of conscious level,
but
I think there is this kind of strong sense of male sexual expectation and entitlement, and consent. We have to think and have a conversation about what consent actually means. Is it something achieved? Do you get consent under you try to by making somebody compliant or pressured or to feel guilty about it. It has to be free. It has to be willing. It has to be enthusiastic. And these are all the challenges. So this is a good campaign, but it's in a much broader social and cultural context. Another story that was around in the last couple of days was related to girls at school feeling pressured, hugely pressured, to send nude pictures of themselves.
So-called sexting.
So-called sexting. And then those being sent around. Now, this is part of the same thing. That it's really sad. It's really sad that young people.
Of children, basically.
It is. But it's also really sad that boys think this is
okay.
This is okay, and that the girls that they are in their classes with and spending time with in school and out of school, that it's somehow okay and acceptable to be treating people in that way. So it's all part of a much bigger issue that we really need to open up in a serious way.
Well, this leads me rather neatly or incidentally to the next subject, which is a consultation by the Scottish Government on financial redress for children who've been abused in care. Mm-hmm. So maybe I know we've done a big segue from the kind of sexual abuse that we might have been talking about to this, but this is the government's attempt to consult and to find some agreement on how to compensate the now adult victims of childhood abuse whilst in the care system. Yep. Those children who were let down, those children who were perhaps badly treated or beaten or hurt in some way for them to get redress. And the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, was saying today that Scotland has joined a small but growing number of countries facing up to the wrongs of the past, responding to the harm done to children in care by those who were trusted to look after them. And he's saying it's the right thing to do. He goes on to say, I know that nothing can make up for what has happened, but along with other measures to help survivors, financial redress is an important step. I think Swinney's basically saying that not only do we acknowledge that these people have been through this trauma, but they're prepared to give them something to try and pay back for this wrong that was done. How do you think this will play? Do you think the Scottish Government will be able to reach enough groups and to find some way of doing this? It seems quite a wide-ranging consultation.
I've worked in the past with survivors, adult survivors, both of childhood and of adult sexual abuse and other forms of harm, and I know just how important actually this is. So I'm encouraged that the Scottish Government is taking this issue seriously, and that John Swinney is stating that they want to find an appropriate way to offer financial redress, because partly because it's a kind of vindication, that sense we recognise the harm that's been done to you, and we recognise the costs that has meant for you. The costs, obviously, the trauma and living with that, but also, what else are folk going to lose a result of that? What might their lives have been? Where might they have ended up working? What kind of careers might they have had? What kind of earning potential might they have had? How much money have they had to spend on counselling? A lot of these issues have real financial and material implications. So it's important symbolically as a statement and a recognition and a validation of the absolute harm that those who were in positions of trust and authority have caused. But it's also about saying we take seriously that this has had real costs for you in your life, and we want to do something to
help you.
So I mean, I don't know what mechanisms or approaches, and this will be challenging, because we know there are many young people who've been in that situation.
I'm looking at the background to this here, and historical abuse would be defined as abuse which took place prior to the 1st of December 2004. Spouses and children of deceased survivors should also be able to make an application for next of kin payment. Because I guess if somebody was severely affected by the trauma of childhood abuse, they can end up with conditions such as PTSD. And I have a friend actually who suffered childhood abuse and does suffer from PTSD. And that has crippled his attempts to find and keep work. He became reclusive. He's also become afraid of going out in public places. It really psychologically damaged this guy. And so he's not been able to work as a result. And this is precisely the kind of redress I think needs to be made.
It does.
John Swinney has said that the scheme will remain open for applications up to 5 years hence. So it's going to go on for quite a long time, with a power in the bill to extend this if it's required. So it's not going to just finish. If it looks like this is an effective method of helping people who've suffered this abuse, then they're going to continue it. It's something very unusual in government these days for them to say that. There aren't many governments who say, we're going to give this money and we're going to keep giving it.
That's laudable. Are any figures being mentioned here? Because will there be a limit, an upper limit as to how much people can apply for, or how will those things be worked out?
It is a consultation at this stage, so I don't think any kind of financial framework or a formula has been arrived at yet, but I'm sure that will be in later consultations, because this is obviously just the beginning of it. This consultation runs for 12 weeks, so I would guess that during that 12 weeks they will talk to all the stakeholders involved in this and try and get, as you say, some figures. Now we have to move on, unfortunately, from that story, although it's a very important one, to another one, which is basically about the programme for the Scottish Government, which is about to be published. And it should be announced in Parliament tomorrow when they reconvene after the recess. The Scottish Government has been extremely busy during this period, and they're going to be looking at everything that they've achieved in the last year. And this is quite, and they're trying to remind everybody actually about what they've actually been doing in the last year, because everything's been eclipsed by all this Brexit chaos, that the good work of government has been buried underneath all of this bad news. So I can start listing them here. They have a lovely list of good things that the Scottish Government has done, becoming the first government in the world to fund access to free period products across schools. Another
That's an issue, period poverty and meeting that need and seeing it as a justice issue is something that Women for Indy has campaigned on over recent years. So I think it's
something you've been campaigning for, yes. The other items are another one which I think is important to many women, and that is the baby box. Many young women giving birth who may be on their own, they don't have a partner to support them, and they may not have any kind of equipment to deal with a newborn baby, and this is a gift to them, this box of everything that you might need for the first few weeks.
And that's great, but also important about the baby box is precisely that it's universal. It's available to all new parents and babies. So it's a kind of, there's something good about making that kind of statement that all children in Scotland being born deserve to have the same starting point, And I think I certainly know anecdotally of folk who've had babies or who've grandchildren, and for whom that's really meant a lot to them. Actually,
the other thing that struck me about the baby box is I know this as a father, that when you're a new parent, and your first baby arrives, you have no idea what to buy for that baby. And you rush around trying to find out what to get. And here is a box full of everything that you might need. So a wonderful gift for anybody, really, who's recently become a parent. Other things that the Scottish Government will be mentioning in this list of things that it has achieved is working with Scottish Development International to support more than 2,200 Scottish businesses to trade globally. So they're looking at exporting, overseas trade, importing as well, I guess, as part of this, and helping them to win over £1.5 billion worth of orders. Now, that's a tremendous achievement for small companies. You've got a large number of small firms generating that amount of income from foreign orders is remarkable for a country the size of Scotland. I mean, we are a small country, but we seem to, I hate to use this phrase, punch above our weight, but we really do. We seem to be able to manufacture and sell, in phenomenal amounts for the size of the nation. This is part of the Scottish Government's commitment to investing over £20 million over the next 3 years through their export plan called A Trading Nation. And finally, if you had a wish list for the Scottish Government yourself, and you could say to them, yeah, Nicola, if you're watching, what would you say to Nicola Sturgeon you would like to see included in the next session of the Scottish Parliament? What would you like the government to start working on next?
Well, do you know what I think would be a really bold and ambitious thing for the Scottish Government to do? And this is thinking about Nicola and her, she's always been very proud to say that she's a feminist and she's really committed to gender equality. I think a gender equality bill all the different, there's some really good initiatives going on and very encouraging in the Scottish Government over recent years, which have been, equality measures, let's say in relation to gender segregated job markets, the fact that women tend to be congregated at the lower end of a lot of trades and professions. Exactly. There are transport issues that affect women in very major ways. Child poverty is so linked to the poverty of women, and Westminster austerity has really been a war against poor women and their children. So, I recognise and value a lot of the good things that the Scottish Government has done, but I think a really bold and transformative, way of pulling together and making coherent policy out of a lot of the initiatives would be to take seriously the need for gender budgeting. In other words, when you're setting your budget,
I like that idea.
Yeah, it's been it's not something that Nicola is unfamiliar with. It's been around, sure. and the Scottish Women's Budget Group and Women for India and others have been talking a lot about this. Women for India, we are very much concerned and developing our own kind of woman manifesto that includes what that it means for what the economy means for creating a truly equal Scotland. And that means, assessing all the things, all our spending streams and all our policies, bearing this in mind. So I think a gender equality bill and serious gender budgeting would be actually transformative for a whole range of policy areas that the Scottish Government at this time has the powers to deal with, and would really kind of fix its reputation as kind of pioneering on this front for everybody's benefit, because a society that's working well for women, and particularly poorer women, disabled women, women with caring responsibilities, women from the black and ethnic minority communities, that's a society that's good for everybody.
It's a very pluralist view as well, I think, and I see where you're going with it, because there is this huge imbalance in the way society is structured generally in favour of men. Yeah. Women are down here, men are up here. It's been like that for too long.
And it's, as you say, it's structured. It's, this is not about, it's not about how women and men get on with one another or
women
individuals.
And men do not see themselves as enemies.
Structural, systemic ways in which all these so-called normal ways in which our economy and our policy development have worked for centuries, or certainly in recent years. We just need to take a really fresh look at them and say, let's not accept this. Violence against women. Let's think this is not just something that we ameliorate. This is something that we have to work to eradicate, because if we're in the business of building and imagining a better Scotland, a sort of independent Scotland as a global nation, that has to be fundamental.
I think that's a very important message to get across today. Now, we're just coming up to the end of the show. We're just about running out of time. I would love to talk more about this subject, but we are running a little bit late. The last story this evening is about Hurricane Dorian, which has just struck the Bahamas today with wind speeds around the eye wall of over 165 miles per hour. This has been made, you should see this now from the satellite image of I've just been told, actually, this has been photographed from the International Space Station as it's passing over the storm. So a remarkable bit of almost live photography of an unfolding disaster. Hurricane Dorian is a Category 5. It's the most powerful hurricane that you can get. What's worse about it, apparently, is the fact that this hurricane, although it's enormous, is moving incredibly slowly at less than 1 mile per hour. So once that hurricane is over you, and that eye wall, which is the circular area in the centre that you can see the hole in the middle, the winds around the inside of that eye wall are travelling at over 165 miles, and that's the average speed, up to 185 miles per hour. It's enough to uproot virtually any building. I often find myself wishing I lived in the Bahamas, but today, no. It's been horrific. I mean, the photographs and the little images coming out from people's phones before the system went down from the Bahamas showed an incredible scene of devastation. Yeah. They're saying a 23-foot storm surge. You're talking about something the height of a building.
It's difficult to imagine, the power of that, and the terror of knowing that's approaching, and then that you're engulfed by it, and
where do you go? You know where to hide.
You go? And in so much of the the Caribbean islands or that area,
very low lying,
buildings that are
virtually
not necessarily
at sea level. It only takes 1 or 2 meters of rising sea,
so
and it sweeps them away.
The catastrophic devastation, and this, of course, it happens year after year, the hurricane season.
There is a season.
But the particular, absolute force of this is really difficult to comprehend.
They say that, they don't say this, a fact that hurricanes are formed when the sea temperature rises to 26 Celsius at the surface, and obviously global climate change and a warming of the ocean is a part of that, and so I think we can probably expect to see more of these catastrophic storms in the future.
I mean, we're seeing so many extreme weather events that are the worst, the most extreme in history or on record.
August day.
This
breaking records every day.
So we are in a climate crisis, and we have to just stop talking about it and really take it seriously and start acting at the kind of structural level. I mean, there's things that we all can try to do in our personal lives, but really, if we don't,
but we haven't got that much
control
as individuals, do we? We need the whole of industry to change itself dramatically, and I think I know that the Scottish Government is committed to this, and independence would free us from the shackles of oil, coal, nuclear
the Scottish Government is committed to it, but it. I think critical friends would recognise that the Scottish Government is remains a bit cautious and
It's a little
you
bit
know, playing
conservative with
both
a small
sides.
c,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
on a range of issues, and you know, groups like Extinction Rebellion are really trying to sort of shake
And
this
young
up and
Greta Thunberg,
disrupt us.
who's swooping across the globe at the moment, like a sort of
and her
modern day-
impact is because she just speaks truth to power, and she will not be deflected from.
I
this
love
is the
this
way
girl.
it
I
is.
think she is the most remarkable young person I've ever seen. As you say, because she doesn't take crap from the mostly the men in suits, patting her on the head and saying that was lovely, now go away. Well, listen, thank you very much for being our guest this evening.
Thanks,
on
Gordon.
Scotland at 7.
Enjoyed it.
We have, I said, overrun a little bit, but it usually happens when we have a good subject, and I think we have covered a lot of very heavy topics tonight in detail. So thank you for your input. As you know, producing television programmes is expensive, and so to allow us to continue making programmes for you and to pay the bills for the studio, we need more people to sign up as Broadcasting Scotland supporters. Your £5 a month will help us to continue. We need about 300 new subscribers prepared to pay this £5 a month, and that will also help us to set up a new programme which we're hoping to launch shortly, which will be a new version of, if you like, Any Questions, but it'll be a distinctly Scottish version. And we are going to call it Scottish Answers rather than Scottish Questions. It's a little bit more positive than Any Questions, I think we should say. But anyway, that's about it from Scotland at 7 this evening. I will be back again in this chair on Thursday night. In the meantime, from all of us here at the Scotland at 7 team, a very good night to you.